Join me in formally welcome Professor Wole Soyinka and his appearing like magic. Okay.
Thank you very much for being with us today. We are feeling very honored, very privileged to be a partner of this beautiful initiative managed by the director of the festival, of the Lagos Book and Art Festival. And we're feeling very, very honored to be chosen by Mr. Wole Soyinka, to have one session of the festival here.
Something that happened recently in a film of your poem, The Humanist Ode to Chibok and Leah Sheribu. This was presented in the Poetry Festival in Rome, and then I think subsequently it got to France, and so a journalist from Le Monde asked this question, and I think the caption of the statement was, Wole Soyinka, the last of the humanists. And the question to me was, do you think he's the last of the humanists? And what does humanism mean from an aesthetic point of view for Africans who are your students?
Have been taken for granted by portions of the world, certain societies, certain levels and typologies of civilization. I think it's taken for granted, so that even though, of course, you still have entities like humanist associations of Great Britain, of America, of France, Italy, etc., and the philosophers are still referred to from time to time. And there's even a vibrant magazine. I know I still get my copies regularly. That reminds me, I must pay up. That despite that, I think the impulse towards the humanistic Valhalla of society has been absorbed so intimately that many writers and poets and essayists and even painters, I think, in many societies, take it as a given. Unfortunately, for that level of complacency, that presumption, certain things happen from time to time. I'm very glad that you tagged on to your question the reference to day-to-day, the quotidian existence, because that implicates also politics, which sometimes can become a god in itself. In other words, the political agenda becomes so sacrosanct and so ruthless and so demeaning of human beings, the entity that constitute our consciousness and distinguishes us from other living species. From time to time, events take place which challenge that complacency, such as, to take the most obvious, most notorious, immediate example, not the most atrocious, what's happening today in Ukraine. Many Westerners I know must be appalled. They must say, is this really possible in this age of humanist absorption into human mentality, even thinking? How is such a thing possible? To what end exactly? So there's one blatant deification of a political agenda. So while the rest of us reify essences into deities, and give them names, either on the omnipotent level or as members of a special divine cabinet, doesn't matter, it's the same thing, the same goal. Then you discover that there's somebody sitting somewhere, the chief priest of a new political deity, which call it expansionism, call it history, sense of history, very often falsely based, of course, because it's always one person's history in contrast to the others. The sense of territorial imperialism, which one would have thought ran aground on the continent of Africa, and we're still contending with the effects, by the way. And to see that kind of degradation, that kind of retardation in humane thinking, challenges the very basis on which the European world, for instance, even used the word democracy, which is supposed to be the political agenda, at least the political vehicle of humanist thinking, at least that we've been able to come up with up till now. And so when we reach a stage where what is happening here on this continent, in this country, and we get to that level where the human quotient is relegated to mere statistics, sort of mindless, bloodless, fleshless statistics, then it's time to invoke the often neglected, I don't want to even call it too weighty a word like philosophy of humanism, just simple humanist sense of relationship to other human beings, as well as to the environment that we live in. For me, the captivity of those students, I don't know which is more horrifying, the capture and the enslavement of those pupils, or isolated events like the martyrdom of that girl, Deborah, in, what state was it? Bauchi, who was lynched. Not merely lynched, that was bad enough. Lynched by her fellow students, brutally, in broad daylight, in the presence of state security officers. Bad enough. And then you have the head of a respected religion, of a world religion like Islam, the representative of that religion in Nigeria, who's the mullah, the head mullah of the mosque in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, applauding the act. Then you just wonder, is it possible for us in Africa to point even in the direction of Ukraine, to feel horrified, to become humanly involved when we see an atrocity like that taking place and being applauded right on our own soil? You just wonder where the human has gone in us. That's all.
It is a pleasure, first and foremost, for me to be here and sitting down beside the Colossus himself. Professor Wole Soyinka, every one of us know that he is a giant in African literature and world politics, world affairs. And he has written so many books, some of which we have read, some we have not. By the African tradition, we expect that a woman of Sadiku's age would be wise, would be full of wisdom, just as Baroka, the Baale himself is, because she's close to his age. But in the demystification of what Sidi upholds, sadly, Sadiku plays a very major role in what happens to her in her relationship with the Baale Baroka. We never heard anything about Okonkwo's mother. Is it that people of your generation did not consider that women could play any other role apart from tempters, to be tempting men, to be, to be just givers of life to the children, and then when they reproduce and bear children, they are forgotten. Because they are not, we don't see engineers, women coming out as engineers in any of works of first generation authors or writers, not just you. Is there a reason for this, sir?
They are human beings just like the rest of us, and there are villains among them. There are clowns among them, musical people. There are temptresses among them. There are geniuses among them. I mean, you've seen my play of the giants, you know. Have you ever seen a worse collection of reprobates than those whom I depict in that play, the play of giants? And they're all male predators, conceited, power-drunken, drunk characters, alienated from their community. I don't think that any of my plays put together such a gallery of villains, of worthless characters, and they occupy the highest rung of society. What more do you want? You know, I'm sorry, I don't accept this kind of analysis of the work. If I did, I would tell you bluntly, but I do not accept it. I'm a teacher of literature and a consumer of literature, and I challenge you to produce any more powerful female figures than feature in my Death and the King's Horseman, for instance, as a Yalodia. I challenge you. So we can't idealize either sex. No, I'm dealing with human beings, and if I feel in a comical mood, I pick whatever comical figures are available and situations. That's my privilege as a writer. Nothing to do with my philosophy about relationship with men and women.
Professor Soyinka, every time that we speak about you, young people, everybody agrees that, you know, he's this gray sage, he's wise, he's almost a deity, he's all of these things. And this morning I was saying to somebody that everybody has different things to say about you, we young writers, but we agree on one thing, like that poem where, you know, there was the elephants and there were different people describing the elephants. We all agree that at least it was an elephant. So that's the sort of way that we look at you. But I would say that the first time that I saw you, it was under the bridge, your artwork, and it was painted. They used to hang a lot of artworks of prominent people. And I would say, oh, there's that man with the afro, who is he? And they say he's Wole Soyinka. And I'll say, why is he there? I mean, there was the president, there was, you know, what has he done? And the answer that I got was, he was a troublemaker and he doesn't go to church. So immediately, a lot of people were picking up awards, most well-behaved child, and I'd never gotten anyone. So I said, I don't think I want to be this person in my strive to become the well-behaved child. But years after, the first time that I met Prof, I was presenting my novel to him, which explores African spirituality. And it was anything but what was expected of a well-raised Christian child. You know, so that brings me to my question for you. A lot of your works unapologetically explore our African culture, our spirituality, and it's something that, you know, has been consistent for you. You haven't changed your mind about it. You haven't woken up and said, you know what, and what I thought about Ogun yesterday, I now think I want to start going to church. You know, so for young writers, someone like me who has been I was raised in an almost fanatic Christian home, you know, how would you speak to us to interpret African spirituality in our works? A lot of us want to demonize it. A lot of us want to say, oh, it's not true, it's something we should not do. You know, so for someone like you, what's your take on it for us when we want to infuse it in our works?
There is one question, which I must ask you in turn. Do you feel, first of all, that you need to explore African spirituality in your works? Or is it that you feel objectively, you know, in assessing literature in general, that you feel that this is neglected and therefore you feel obliged as a writer to compensate for that neglect or relegation in relation to other spiritualities? We must begin from there if you're a writer. Because there's no point engaging in that quest unless you feel that what is missing in your writing or the kind of temperament, you know, which leads you to write, that somehow it is related, that it might benefit from that particular quest. That's very important, because we can talk generally about African spirituality, but I'm worried about your feeling compelled to infuse your work with African spirituality. Why do you feel compelled?
Okay, so personally, a few years ago, I had stepped out of attending Mass. I grew up Catholic, and it was because I was getting into this space where I began to do something that a lot of us were not encouraged to do. I was beginning to question, and I had done a lot of precolonial studying and history, so I began to ask myself that there must have been a way we reached God before colonialism. And in asking those questions, I was led to a lot more things. And, my friend would invite me to the Orisha festival, and I'll say, I don't want to go. But over time, I really began to tell myself that, there must have been something there, and why are you afraid of it? So my first novel was actually exploring that question. Why are you afraid of it? Why are there certain phenomena that you think are unreal? Some people write about some people speak about spirit husbands, and they tell them that, there's something wrong with you in your head. But there's some explanations that has defied science, has defined medicals, and these experiences were asked to forget about them. So I explored one through my character, and it was exploring reincarnation, for instance. How do you explain certain things? I had a classmate in primary 5 who had the sickle cell disorder, and she died. And then her mom had another baby, and the baby came with all the scars that she had, all the scars, the bed sores, where the drips were. And I had never seen the baby before, but the first time he saw me, he said, "Oh, do you remember when we used to play in primary 4? And I was taken aback. So I asked and I said, why is this happening? And they said, oh, that's the way he talks. He talks about things that, happened when he wasn't there. And then I said, oh, if I go write this story, it will be your fiction. How do I write about them and not, you are Nobanji now, what's going on? So.
Good. You and I can do business. And the first thing I have to tell you is that there is actually a way of entering, even in contemporary time, in entering the spirituality, or African spirituality. We will talk about the Yoruba because that's where I belong and where I'm most knowledgeable in terms of various African paths to spiritual understanding. And that is that we have an example of a society, a large society called Brazil, which is made up of both, not both, of the Indian world, the original inhabitants of our place with their own spirituality, of the European world, the Portuguese in particular, and other European nations, and of course, the descendants of African slaves, those who were enslaved by the Europeans. And in this country today, you have not just Orisha worship, but we'll talk about the Orisha. There's voodoo as well, which pertains along other parts of West Africa. You have even spiritualities from Central Africa, but the most prominent and the most vibrant happens to be the Orisha. And we must ask ourselves, why is it that that particular spirituality, above all other external ones, have taken such root as to be integrated even into what we will consider, rightly, a Western spirituality, Roman Catholicism, to the extent that the Orisha are actually syncretized with Roman Catholic saints, Chopin with Lazarus, Shango with, I forgot now, but Ogun with St. Anthony. Eshu is very prominent in that society and in that community. And Eshu, in fact, has been rescued from the demonization imposed on that deity by the Roman Catholic, by the religious people generally. When the evangelists, the Western evangelists, came to West Africa and decided to convert us, to save us from what I don't know, but anyway, they needed the devil I'm trying to tell you the mischief which has been done by Western spirituality. They needed a devil. So they looked around, because without the devil, it means there is no sin. And without sin, you cannot be saved. And they wanted us saved. So they looked for the devil, and they honed in on Eshu, because that's a mischievous deity, but a very cerebral one as well. And so they reduced Eshu to nothing but a demon, evil, loaded Eshu with all kinds of negative faculties. Now, Eshu, however, and we're using this as just one example, Eshu has been restored, not only restored in this part of the world, but even elevated over and above the other principal deities. Eshu here is a pathfinder, yes, a decoder of mysteries, because he's the gatekeeper of Ifa, the god of divination, and he's also a mischievous deity, but not really mischievous. He's a dialectician who teaches us that appearances are very deceptive, and that is why in many ceremonies, Eshu is always given the first portion of a meal. Say, please don't teach me sense the hard way. Just stay away, please. And so you see him at the crossroads, which is where human choices are made. And all the deities have these various ramifications of what seems just a superficial existence. And these, of course, are represented, like the Roman Catholic saints are, represented also by figures, which are just focusing mechanisms, not idols being worshipped as the evangelists preached or tried to disseminate. And you have the Orisha worship being followed not merely by descendants of the enslaved, but by the European worshippers, some of whom have even come here to find out which of these various deities is really their personal avatar, so to speak, the personal demiurge. If you study Brazilian society, and I hope as you will someday, from what you say, you should, Brazil or Cuba or even Colombia. You don't hear much about Colombia, but Yoruba worship still continues in Colombia. I visited their shrines over there. And you see that there is absolutely nothing evil about these deities. On the other hand, we see these deities as representing certain facets of human beings, their sensibilities, their relationships to nature, and of course, nature itself. They don't see any contradiction between this spirituality and the Roman Catholic spirituality.
I was going to ask Prof, that when are we going to see another poem in the strain of Her Joy is Wild, which is a lovely poem. I have not seen the new book, the new collection, the new collected poems, I've not seen it, but I do hope that that poem is there. I have not seen it, but I do hope that Telephone Conversation is there. I have not seen it, but I do hope that Unlimited Liability Company, which is not considered a poem, is there. The reason why I say so is that in many languages, including our oldest languages, many times the same word is used for song and poem. And I do not know of anyone, Acha, you are the lawyer here, I do not know anyone who can convert a seemingly sterile expression like Unlimited Liability Company into a poem, into a song. But he did, and that's remarkable when you really come to think about it.
I'm glad you remarked the nature poems. And where did you see The Forest Bids You Welcome? It hadn't been published.
No, it hasn't been published, but I read it all the same. I'm a spirit child.
Yes, I assure you that sort of what I call my forest head is still playing games with words in the poetry. And now that you mention, if it's not too late, I assure you, telephone conversation.
Thank you, Prof.
And the others will be in there. And as I said, there are some. I tried to make it as, Nigerian poets, young poets, they take poetry too seriously. And this informed some of my selection. Because poetry also should be playful, mischievous, risque, disrespectful, irreverent, and so on. That is also part and parcel of the poetic mission. So there's something for you to look forward to.
Thank you, Prof.
From my imagination when I was little, I used to feel Abobaku is someone who has to die because he has to help the king on his journey to the afterlife. So I don't really know who the Abobaku is, the king's husband.
Who is Abobaku?
Creation of this contraption we find ourselves, is it rightly built? Is it falsely built?
How does Prof find time and energy to write?
What prompted you to write this book? Is it part of your collective memory? According to the definition, he said our government have removed the history from the curriculum in Nigerian education. Is it part of your collective memory? Or you want to inspire the new generation about our core values in tradition as an African?
Merely as mythological constructs. I can understand that, right? But what exactly is your religion?
Abobaku is obviously Eleshioba. That's the equivalent of the Abobaku. That's what is meant. But when you say, was it Eleshin or Olunde, it's obviously Eleshin. Olunde was a surrogate who was overcome by a sense of honor, a sense of family shame, and felt he couldn't live with the disgrace, and felt he could rescue the family from obloquy by taking his own life, rightly or wrongly. It's up to the rest of the world to decide. Is the contraption called Nigeria rightly built? No. That's a very definite answer. It was not rightly built. It was never, as with many of the imperial possessions, colonial possessions, these were demarcated to serve the development interests of the colonial powers, expressions of their power, and also, of course, search for raw material to provide it, and even for their normal organic system of productivity to be distorted and geared towards the needs of the European world, and of course their expansion to the so-called New World. How do you find time to write? I have no idea. Somehow it seems to happen. But one thing I can say to you is that I seem to have the advantage of being able to concentrate, to create space for myself anywhere, anytime. Planes, cars. If the mood comes, then I write and I forget the rest of the outer world. So I steal time from real time. Then the question, what is my religion? Do I really need one? I've never felt I needed one. I'm a mythologist. I believe that people have a right and cannot help creating mythologies around themselves, around their experience, and about what they project from the inner recesses of their minds as answers to questions. And so I find nothing wrong with utilizing mythology. It's part and parcel of my creative warehouse. But religion, no, I don't worship any deity, but I consider deities as creatively real, and therefore my companions in my journey, both the real world and the imaginative world. Right, I hope I managed to answer all the questions. And one thing, by the way, I want to say to young writers, because in relation to that question, and also to the young lady here, young writers, I hear you here in numbers, never be afraid to collect your rejection slips. You see, these publishers, they're not really there for you. They are in business. And if the work is not going to sell, they are not going to take it. Okay, there are some who are very imaginative and who actually take on difficult to sell works and try to make up for it with textbooks and so on. They have their heads screwed on tight, very correctly. But don't be discouraged if you get your rejection slips. They are badges of honor. Keep writing. Thank you very much.
Writers all over the world have this poor ability to be able to speak to their works. I dare say, Professor Wole Soyinka belongs to that rare category that he can deliver a speech that will be a masterpiece at the drop of a pin. So I think for that, I think we need to acknowledge that. And nobody even mentioned that he's an actor. And Prof is even reminding me that he's a musician.